Welcome to this special meeting of the Policy and Resources Committee. Usual protocols, keep yourself on mute while you're not speaking and indicate in the chat function if you wish to speak. So can I start by wishing you all a happy new year? I think a couple of weeks ago we were maybe looking forward to a brighter 2021 and hope around seeing eventually an end to this terrible situation. I think as we sit here today, it's difficult to look at that brighter situation. The virus has simply exploded in our community over the past couple of weeks in particular, and we've went from being an area with one of the lowest rates in Scotland, certainly in terms of the Central Belt and urban authorities, to now unfortunately having the highest rate in Scotland. Our rate has increased round about sixfold in that period. So we are facing a significantly different situation that we are facing prior to Christmas, and a significantly challenging situation, hence why obviously the Scottish Government has taken the action it has done to effectively reintroduce lockdown with a clear stay-at-home message to us. So these are very, very challenging times, and that's obviously the reason why this emergency meeting has been called today, to take account of the fact that we are in a very challenging situation. So before we go into obviously discuss the substantive business, first item on the agenda is apologies, substitutions and declarations of interest. Rona, do we have any?
There are no apologies, and could I ask if there are any declarations of interest, please? No?
No.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, apologies from Louise Long, and I'm stepped in for Louise today.
Okay, good to see you, Alan. Okay, so item 2 on the agenda is the COVID-19 proposed temporary resumption of emergency decision-making arrangements for committee meetings. And I would say from the outset that I didn't agree to this special meeting lightly, and officers have not brought this report before the committee lightly. I'm sure there has been significant consideration by the corporate management team around this particular matter. So how I intend to sort of handle the business is I'll invite Gerard to present his report. I'll then invite the Chief Executive to provide a contribution, and if he wishes, he can invite his senior management team also to make a contribution as well. And then I'll obviously open it up for questions and comments from members. Now, I am aware from discussions I've had prior to the meeting that there are concerns among members about reverting back to these emergency arrangements. So, and it's perfectly legitimate for members to raise those concerns, but equally it is obviously important that we hear the professional advice from our officers and take cognizance of that in any decision that we make. So without further ado, I'll invite Gerard to present his report.
Thank you, Convener. With reference specifically to your own introduction there, I thank you for convening this special meeting, and I thank all members for attending at short notice to consider this necessary and urgent report. Convener, I know that you'll allow me to say a few words about this report. This report is submitted as a direct consequence, as you've said, to the nature of the First Minister's statement to Parliament there on Monday, the 4th of January. The First Minister's statement explains the seriousness of the current position overall. Within Inverclyde, we know that there are very serious impacts currently through COVID and the new variant. You've used the words there, Convener, the explosion and the situation as you yourself have referred to and seen it for our local community. We're in that situation. We have to confront that and to deal with this in all aspects of the continuity of the Council's delivery of crucial services. Now, the First Minister's statement clearly draws a direct parallel to that situation in March last year. And indeed, It goes further than that. It says that the First Minister has more concern about that situation than at any time since then. So necessary steps have been taken at national level for lockdown for the reasons of public health. In precisely the same situation, in March 2020, this committee, on the 24th of March, took the decision to implement emergency decision-making procedures. The advice I'm offering to members today within the report is that the resumption of these emergency decision-making procedures is entirely merited. This report is not, convener, about legal or admin staff who administer and, with anything, will continue to administer any of the arrangements that this council wants and approves. No issues about that. The report is about all those officers from all of the services of the council who are engaged in dealing with the current emergency, but who have also got key reporting roles to all of their respective service committees on their widest range of duties. The emergency procedures, convener, and I suggest this to you and to your members, achieve a balance. The emergency procedures free the officers up to deal with critical service delivery, yet also provides elected members with demonstrably, and that's from the previous experience last year, effective opportunities for thorough scrutiny and review of decisions through the operational log. If I'm asked the question, convener, which I think is a fair challenge, why emergency procedures? Firstly, the current stage of the emergency for Inverclyde is severe, and we have to do all we can to safeguard public health. The council is a community leader in that level of response. That's so important. The emergency procedures allow key officers to focus on service delivery, to focus on services for the community. They support the types of decisions and the speed of decisions that are necessary in the emergency situation. The emergency powers facilitate speedy decisions. The emergency powers minimise pressure on attendance within places of work, such as the municipal buildings or other places of work for staff, and thus support the duty of care that this council has as an employer in minimising all situations of face-to-face contact where that can be avoided, where it's not essential. The emergency powers allows officers to focus on service delivery and to focus on their obligations and duties to the public. Yet, with all of these in mind, with all of that, the emergency powers provide members with all of the opportunities for scrutiny and review for key decisions as would be expected in an emergency.
Excuse me, Jerry. Mr. Williams, sorry.
Thank you.
We have a telephone caller. Could I
Sure,
just
thank
ask the telephone caller to identify themselves, please?
Thank-
Rona,
you,
it's Michael McCormick, Rona. I'm really sorry. I've got connectivity problems here.
Okay,
I
thank you.
couldn't get in. So
Thank you.
Thank you, Rona. I'm obliged, and to make sure that Councillor McCormick is hearing everything okay, so thank you very much for that. So I'm just saying here just now that with all of those emergency powers, they provide members with the opportunity and scrutiny and review, and that's as to be expected and has happened in the past. Convener, I can understand from what you have said that members themselves, and I've got to say this, officers also, would be concerned about any departure from our normal cycle of doing business. You've had update reports from me in September and October and December about this. With those in mind, this report accommodates those committees where agendas and reports have already been issued, and indeed tries to deal with issues for the future where there might be future urgent quasi-judicial business that has to be transacted in the council's interests. But any decision for emergency powers will assist not just with the remaining elements of this cycle, but it will help officers and it will free up critical time in this critical stage for preparation of the next cycle of reports for February onwards. And of course, the overall situation will be reviewed at the end of this month. And the normal cycle, as you would expect, and the committee members would be absolutely clear on this, would resume as soon as circumstances would permit. convener, I'm very much an advocate of the merits of the council's committee system. I'm a traditionalist in that respect. I see all of the benefits: robust challenge, decision making and scrutiny. And obviously I would want to address any concerns that members have about this report and this proposal for emergency powers. But I have no doubt about the recommendations that I have put to the committee today, irrespective of what members wish to decide. I have no doubt about those recommendations. Convener, my summary is this. This report seeks to ensure that our existing service delivery continues to be sustainable in the face of the current emergency, the current stage of the emergency, and that we as a council ensure that we've got the staff capacity and the support to manage the current stage of the crisis. That's why I'm recommending the recommendations, Convener. Thank you.
Thanks, Jared. Bring Aubrey in.
Okay, Convener, very much. As you said at the outset, officers would not have brought this report forward lightly, and we haven't done so. We are facing a very serious situation, and what I wanted to do, and I'm going to ask Alan to bring up some slides, is identify where we are currently with the infection rate. You will see from the first slide that sort of halfway down, Inverclyde is sitting at 581 cases over a 7-day period per 100,000, compared to the Scottish average of 291. Next slide. Now, Inverclyde 2 weeks ago was sitting at 78. In Scotland's, it was sitting at 121. We have now mushroomed up to 581, and we are now double the Scottish average. So if the First Minister is concerned about Scotland, then absolutely we have to be concerned about what's happening here in Inverclyde. We are aware that the new variant is prevalent, and we have a tremendous job ahead of us in terms of keeping services going. If I just go on to a few items, and I don't want to repeat too much what Jerry has said, but the CMT and I are focused on ensuring we continue to deliver essential services to the residents and businesses of Inverclyde and maintaining a duty of care to our staff. The First Minister's statement was very forthright in terms of the seriousness of the situation. And I know other councils are closely looking at their infection rates and how that might affect how they manage their services. Staff are being pulled in all directions. We have the issue that staff, those that were shielding, will receive further letters about them shielding, and we're going to have an impact on the numbers of staff that we have in frontline services. And from my perspective, it's important that we start to release officers to deliver on key services. Some of the key services that we are delivering, or indeed all the services that we're delivering, we're going to have to keep an eye on them and then focus on the most essential ones. Therefore, it's important for officers to have the flexibility to start and take some urgent decisions. Members will always have the opportunity to scrutinise what we've been doing. We certainly had in the past an operational log, which we would propose to introduce again, where members can review and scrutinise any decisions that we would take. Clearly, if we're meeting on a fortnightly basis, there's the opportunity for all members, including those members who are not on the PNR exec sub, to attend as observers, to participate and be aware of what we're doing. As I say, and as Jared has said, we don't want to have to be in a situation that we're doing this, but the state of play is such that it causes us great difficulties unless there's the flexibility to do so. If I bring to the third slide, that shows you in blue how serious the increase has been in terms of infection. it's blatantly obvious to the eye how serious things are. And the orange there is the Scottish average. So we have a real job on our hands to keep things going and keep services going. As Gerard has said, there are practicalities in relation to officers beyond the administration side to service committees, and we need to focus on trying to deliver services for those residents and businesses within our community. So I would leave it at that, convener, and then ask each of the directors to give a bit of a flavour from their side of how difficult things are. If I can maybe turn to Scott.
Thank you, Aubrey. First, frontline services, which is the area I want to focus on. We are fully engaged just now with gritting operations. We're gritting 24 hours a day. And we've had a difficult period over Christmas and New Year. The other key service area we've managed to deliver on so far is waste collection and keeping household waste recycling centres open. There's two pressures to us just now. One is that we're still operating waste with additional resources from grounds maintenance because we are taking loaders out on site with minibuses. So we have 7 drivers deployed every day to take loaders out to support the waste collection. Back in March, April, when we had the last serious incident, roads was less of a concern, so we could use resources from roads to top up the waste services. As of this week, the challenges we've got are that we will have a number of staff going on to shielding. We've also got a number with caring responsibilities that we need to speak to, and I will be losing some of the frontline resource. If we lose people through self-isolating, some of the services will become critical, and at short notice I would anticipate stopping services on a prioritised basis. And the kind of things would be stopping footway gritting, potentially closing household waste recycling centres. We would endeavour so far as possible to keep core waste going and priority gritting routes going. But it is a serious situation and it could change day by day, just depending who amongst our frontline employees are identified as contacts where they have to self-isolate. And the challenge that creates for my heads of service and myself is that as we go into difficult operating conditions, our role becomes much more operational as opposed to strategic, and that consumes our time. So our time is involved far more in delivering frontline services compared to what we would normally do if we were sitting in this building.
Okay, Ruth, you want to come in?
Okay, so what's like through my lens at the moment, the critical service delivery is making sure that we can provide the childcare and in-school learning for those at the front line. That's absolutely at the top, and keeping people safe at the same time. I was speaking to a respiratory nurse this morning about her childcare arrangements. There's no prizes for guessing what happens if she doesn't turn up at work. You know, this is a huge task for us to make sure that everybody in the frontline services can fulfil their duties and that we can provide the childcare for the children. Also, we have to remember we are doing track and trace with this as well. So at any point during COVID-19, any child in school who has had a positive test for COVID-19 will be undertaking track and trace and contacting all the contacts. That will remain in process. At the same time, and with a very quick turnaround for the childcare, we are also making sure that we are providing remote learning. Sorry, I'm getting feedback.
Yeah, I think Councillor Wilson could possibly be the source.
Okay, it stopped just now, so I'll continue. So basically, as well as that, making sure we can provide remote learning for every pupil in Inverclyde. That includes the vulnerable pupils, all the pupils, and also making sure that the people taking exams this year or not taking exams this year in the senior phase, relying on qualifications, have absolutely the best of education. That means we have to quality assure what our teachers are doing. So we are putting in new processes to make sure that what we are doing is fit for purpose in a completely different educational landscape. We're on a meeting this morning saying that there will be scrutiny of this nationally. So the week of when my committee were due to be taking place, I will be involved with national scrutiny on the quality assurance of our remote learning, quite rightly, but also I'll be involved in scrutinising our own remote learning to make sure that it's fit for purpose. We will also be supporting schools to make sure that they have every bit of support in place, all the guidance changes. It's continually changing. We continually meeting with our head teachers, updating them on the latest guidance, and also in a climate when some of our staff will have been infected by COVID-19. So the teacher who was in front of a class one day may not be the teacher who is in front of a class the next day. And we have to have a very complex staffing arrangement to make sure that we can fulfill the gaps. In addition to that, we're looking at the humanitarian assistance, there's the helpline, but also CLD going around providing the services to the community. At the moment, we've got them out delivering home learning packs to those who are requiring paper, pencils, additional resources, but also being able to engage with the vulnerable, the most vulnerable in their houses as well. The other issue for me is that we are going to enter a time where we will need quick decisions made. There is it's an ever-changing landscape. Guidance comes out and different funding sources come out. And also we will need fairly quick decisions for some of the initiatives that we need to take forward. So for me, looking at this, then absolutely supportive of the moving to the emergency P&R.
Okay, thanks, Ruth. I'll bring Alan Stevenson in.
Thanks, Convener. Just similarly, in the Health and Social Care Partnership, obviously, we need to keep protecting our child and family service users and work closely in relation to criminal justice. But I suppose that the thing I would like to impress is the unprecedented nature of the vaccines that we're going to have to deliver. We've got off to a very good start. We've vaccinated 13 of the 14 care home residents in Inverclyde, and we're finishing off that first phase of vaccinations for the very most vulnerable tomorrow. But the scale of the challenge for the vaccinations mean Louise, myself and others will need to plan on a different scale to release as many staff as possible to take on the vaccination programme to a level that we've never achieved before. So we're really going to be focused on the vaccination programme. We still have our community assessment centre on the go, so we're able to look after people who need rapid assessment. Care at homes, again, my biggest challenge this year. We know for a fact there will already be 30 people that will start shielding. So that's 30 people that I won't have access to, and we'll have to look at how we can pull staff from other areas to come in. We did last time with volunteers. So we're at a critical stage. It's the most challenging it's ever been. And I understand Louise has discussed today with the IGIB about going back to a similar situation with the chair and the vice chair having a 2-weekly meeting with a rolling action list. So again, the thought of having to service a committee or the IGIB when I'm asking all my service managers to really go onto the front line and get ready for this vaccination programme and provide personal care for people, because care at home remains one of the biggest challenges moving forward. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for that, Alan. Right, I'm going to open it up to members now, and the first sort of challenge I've got is from Chris Cowley. Gerard, I'm going to ask you to initially respond to that, and then if any of the other officers want to come in, and then obviously if there's any other members want to raise a question or comment, please indicate in the chat. Gerard.
Thank you, Convener. It's the widest range of officers, Convener, and for Councillor Curley. I suppose both myself and the corporate directors who've just actually outlined their situation reports indicate this, that in terms of my presentation to this committee, I'm saying that this is not just about the 3 committee officers that I have who deal with the 10 equivalent standing committees of this council. It's about all of the officers in this council, and they are many and varied, who've got reporting responsibilities to their respective service committees. Like we heard just briefly there from Alan about his service managers who will have those responsibilities, who would otherwise be freed up. So in answer to Councillor Curley's totally relevant question, totally relevant, it's the whole of the CMT, officers like myself and the Chief Financial Officer, the Head of HR, and Martin McNabb. All of those officers across the widest range of the council services, who I cannot put a number on, from service managers and even to team leaders, who've got reporting roles in terms of performance management or any form of decision making to our whole range of committees. It's a whole range of officers and well beyond just the officers whom you're seeing on the screen today. Thank you.
Just to follow that up, so presumably the number of reports that would be prepared for Policy and Resources Exec would be significantly less than the number of reports that would have to be prepared for a regular cycle of committee meetings.
Convener, yes, that is the absolute point in a nutshell. The operational log, which I offer from demonstrable experience, provides members with that effective scrutiny and review of those speedy decisions that officers must deal with if we're going to continue delivering services to the public. It's that capacity issue. By freeing up that capacity, by dealing with that, cuts a swathe through our response to the emergency and our ability to do things, but does not impede, and it provides the members with an opportunity for robust challenge. We've got the evidence of that all the way through from March through to August. Thank you, Camille.
Okay, thanks for that, Gerard. David Wilson. David?
Thank you, Convener. Yes, I'm on a WhatsApp group with the leaders of Conservative groups and all the, it's 31 councils. And I asked them yesterday how many are considering suspending committees. There's only one come back that was Highland, said that they're having a meeting about it. The rest are relatively adamant, you know, people like Angus, Eastern Bartonshire, East Ayrshire are quite adamant that they're not moving to committees, they're not moving away from committees to emergency procedures, just staying with committees. And I certainly believe that we should stay with the committee structure. I think it's working well for us, and I would support us staying with the status quo.
Thanks for that comment, David. I mean, I would suggest we might be at the vanguard on this particular one, and you might see a changing situation over the coming days. Elizabeth, you want to come in?
Thanks, Convener. Just a couple of comments. Obviously, this is a huge decision, and it's something that we're all torn on, probably to greater or lesser degrees. And it's just a couple of points that I've just been mulling over while everyone's been speaking. I hope it's okay just to kind of cover them, if that's all right. I'm not sure that we are precisely in the same situation as we were in March 2020. When we made the decision to go to emergency powers at that point, we were literally starting from first principles, and we were developing new systems of working, we were developing new practices, we were developing a way of existing and delivering services that was completely alien to anything that we'd done before. And I think now that we've done that, the experience of having done it and the way that we are currently operating and delivering services surely must be a game changer in terms of being able to deal with what's happening now. Yes, as a change in the metrics, and yes, as an escalation in the severity of the virus, but not as an emergency for our organisation to deal with. And I worry that if we move, this is my base point, I worry that if we move to emergency measures for what might be pray God a small amount of time, then we're sending out a message that we're not the safe pair of hands collectively that we as an organisation know that we absolutely are, because of the hell that we did go through in March and April and May and June and July last year, when we were completely reorganising how we work as an organisation. So that's the kind of base point that I would make. Again, just in terms of things getting done, delegated powers do exist. We should use them. Decisions could be made by an exec sub if it was an absolutely serious thing that had to happen as an emergency. And I think there's possibly a challenge in terms of, if we were making a decision to keep with the committee structure as it is, as to what papers actually get brought. We get a lot of papers for noting. It's something that we've talked about quite a lot. And maybe there's just a change needed to be made in what actually is brought to our committees, rather than stopping having the committees, because I do think we are operating in a different space than we were operating in March 2020.
Okay, thanks for that, Elizabeth. I'm going to bring the Chief Exec in to maybe respond to that, and if any of the corporate directors want to come in and just explain how the situation at the moment differs from the previous lockdown we were in. Aubrey?
Convener, what I would say to Elizabeth is that, yes, we're more prepared maybe than in having virtual conversations like we're having at the moment. I think that it's because of the demand on staff and officers to provide information from reports, gearing up, and we need urgent decisions. Now, if I want to arrange a P&R exec sub, which we can do, I could be arranging one for one day and then 2 days later arranging one for another day to deal with aspects purely of changes which Scott would do to his services. He might have to stop providing certain services or close civic amenity sites or whatever. Those would have to be done very, very quickly and have to be done in some cases in hours. Similarly, for Louise, we were having a debate at the CMT this morning. She requires to deal with some essential elements of her service provision first and foremost. There'll be other elements where she will have to drop very, very, very quickly. So I hear what you're saying, but the immediacy of what we need and the decisions that we will require to take, if we don't have that authority to do that, then essentially the 6 weekly or 8 weekly meeting sessions that we would have, if we're going to give due respect to having the governance arrangement set up, just won't work. It's as simple as that. I think it's quite sad, you know, in the grand scale of things, that we've got so much to do here, and yet we are required, and members would be desirable or desiring for us to continue, when on the face of it, the task is enormous. I mean, I can't say that enough. We've got to get to grip with the fact that we have so much to do. And we are unique in many ways in terms of the way we were attending offices up to now. But we have to be very, 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 very serious about the whole thing here. And I wouldn't for a minute bring this before members and have time lost in having discussions if we didn't think it was essential. So I can't make a plea enough, Convener and Elizabeth. The reality is we need to be able to make decisions, and we need to be able to make decisions extremely quickly. And that's the stark reality of it. Convener.
Okay, thanks, Aubrey. Just, are any of the corporate directors want to come back in and respond? Just indicate. Ruth?
I think we have to be very careful we don't end up with a duplication as well. If you have the service committees and also the emergency powers, the time taken to write reports, to furnish these committees, and just the time taken for the organisation of it is something that would worry me. And I think we've got to be very careful we don't back ourselves into actually giving extra work by almost a duplication of that.
Okay. Right, I'll bring Jim Lockerty in.
Yeah, thanks, Stephen. I think, firstly, to Aubrey, there is no doubt that every elected member knows how hard our officers are working, and I think that goes without saying. I mean, I work closely with Ruth and our team, with Louise and our team. We know the pressure they're under. I think our bit is we're sitting here as elected members and we're able to speak and we're able to discuss this with our chief officers. We've got to remember that we are actually speaking for the 22 councillors here. And I think that is a bit, how do you make sure that our colleagues don't feel as if they're disenfranchised, that feel as if they're part of the council, and don't feel as if they're part of that decision-making process. And I think that's one of the key things. Of course, we don't want to put our officers divert their attention to doing what they don't really need to do just to service our committees. But we've got to understand as well is that we are here from all political parties speaking for the councillors who are not here today as well. And it's just I think if there was a way that we could possibly ensure that officers' time is not spent, I don't mean needless, but it's not spent totally on governance, but can make other members of the council feel as if they're involved in the council. And that would be probably my only criticism the last time. It's okay for me, but I've got to understand as well is that we can be seen to be disenfranchising our colleagues. So I hope we could somehow take that on board and find a way forward on that.
Before I bring the chief exec in and that, Jim, I think it's fair to point out that things have moved on since the last lockdown, and that we don't have a councillor in Australia for a start, but the groups have all got the facilities to meet online as well that they didn't really have in the early stages of the first lockdown. And I think, as the chief exec indicated, there is the facility that all 22 members could attend the executive subcommittee, albeit the 6 standing members would essentially be the only ones that would have votes if there were votes. But they could all attend and obviously observe, or even with the latitude of the chair participating. And I know Elizabeth has recently, and Graham Brooks has done it, sat in on observing particular committee meetings, so that there is that facility. Aubrey, you want to come back?
Yeah, I mean, I fully appreciate that some members are probably more aware of what's going on than others because of the way we have set things up. And that's probably one of the reasons why we moved and have continues to adopt a committee system rather than a cabinet system. So my view is we do not want to establish anything that disenfranchises any of our members or indeed any of our staff. So if there is some form of communication that we could provide for members to give them the confidence and the knowledge when people are and constituents are asking questions, then I am absolutely comfortable with us doing that. I mean, there are many things that go on, and I hear comments occasionally from members, "Oh, I didn't know anything about that," and I understand that because we're a pretty large organisation. But if there's a way, convener, for us to adopt a communication system, we have daily briefings, but if we need to add to that in terms of specifics, I can remember the discussion about Brendan Hurl leaving, and members said, "Oh, I didn't know anything about it." So I'm absolutely comfortable about providing that extra added briefing for movements of staff, for example, at a senior level, so that you're made aware of that. And
board up say they could get 200 and what?
I think it's between 200 and 300.
I can hear you, Janet. That's fine. You're on mute again. Okay, Aubrey, you finished? Okay, Janet, I'm going to bring you on now, Janet.
Thanks, convener. Obviously, I've been sitting listening, and I have been worried about various things with this virus. And it annoys me that lack of information, we'll say, coming out from various departments. But what I'm worried about now is we're suddenly going to, and I know, and I don't mean this wrongly, jump up because of what's happened in the last fortnight. And yet, if people had got and moved to the places that were doing things wrong, maybe they wouldn't have jumped up. Now, I know how I feel about licensed premises. I wanted to know at that time, if you're operating, you couldn't operate under the same amount of people inside, and you had a figure on it. And yet in a local paper where somebody says they could get in 200 odd people a day, and lo and behold, that same place was a place at Tesco's, and I'll use Tesco's because we're talking about it, turned around and staff get problems. Now, at that stage, that's fine. We'll say to a point, nobody, and I got a few phone calls, knew who to phone because they want to know if Tesco's had to do a deep clean, and it was something left. If you go to Tesco's, they said they didn't need to do a deep clean. To me, these are the things that should have went out first of all. And I'm serious when I say this to everybody, including, we'll say, people like me in the licensed trade. We should have known that. And I'm not saying it doesn't happen, but a lot of them should have made sure their staff couldn't sit down with the rest of the people close up, and there's CCTV cameras about in most pubs now. You could check that out. I don't know if it's been checked. We've got to, you're right, we've got to work together for this. And that includes everybody. And I keep saying that to make sure this virus is put under control. And it worries me. And I think when Alan says about 30 people going to be off self-isolating, now that's sad. And we know that, but you've got to protect yourself. At the same time, we've caused that. And I mean to because of, we've not been hard enough and strict enough to tell people exactly what they've got to do. And that's it. Now, there's a gentleman just now complaining. The first time he was allowed to open, this time he's not, and he's still not changed. He's still in that ward. Says you have to go and see about it and go to the appropriate people, and that was it. So that's the sort of thing you've got to look at. And I can understand, Aubrey, because you've got short of staff. Staff are going to be off, whether I like it or you like it, to make sure they're protected. But you've also got to remember, councillors, there's a lack of, let's say, communications for some of the councillors, and some of them haven't been in a situation where they know where to go and which door to knock. I just feel that's it. And I always used to say it, and I'm going to use a name for the past to remember. Neil Green was the only officer that ever went on holiday, gives you 2 phone numbers to phone, so that in event of emergency, you could do that. And that was it. That's the sort of thing I think it helps us. Now, I know how I felt. I felt a lot better. And I'm looking at these 4 walls, getting to committee again. If I sat there and never said a word, and I know how a lot of people's feeling, and I know how I felt, and I was wondering how to do it. And I now can see when Alan's talking and Aubrey's talking, and I will go to provide services, but at the same time, how do I make it so that councillors feel they are part of the council? The way you and I felt, maybe, and other folk many years ago, we were always part of, we were never in this, but we're always part of the council, even though you weren't on that committee. So thanks. That's the sort of things that worry me. That's the sort of things I'm fighting with myself now, whether I turn around and say, could you leave this at the end of the month to see how it goes, see if the figures drop down because of, or whether we can't. And I'm fighting myself which way I'm going to go, because I seriously go, because I don't want people to feel out of it. And at the same time, I don't want this virus to take any more life than it has done, if I can get away with it. Lost too many friends. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Chan. I mean, I think some of the points that you were making are actually points that would be made and challenge that would be provided at an executive subcommittee. And remember that the primary focus of the executive subcommittee was to focus on the public health emergency and things around that. So our normal committee cycle doesn't actually allow for that, right? So I personally think that we need the emergency arrangements. The issue is, given the reservations that some people have expressed, whether we could accommodate continuing on with the the normal committee cycle, but we'll come to that in a minute. I'm going to bring Alan Puckering in at the moment. I mean, in terms of
something I forgot to say that you said, and I think that should be made out to everybody so the councillors understand it, that we can come in and actually sit on and listen to the debate even though we don't take part. I think a lot of councillors maybe didn't know that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to bring Alan in because in some sense I don't know what Alan's actually going to say, but certainly one of the things that in the previous lockdown we didn't do was obviously produce the regular financial monitoring reports, etc. But Alan also had staff who were responsible for delivering 11 million pounds worth of business grants to support the local economy. So there's an opportunity cost in terms of continuing to provide the normal information, which means you don't have the capacity to do other things. But maybe Alan's going to say something completely different, but I'll bring him in.
Thank you, convener, and good new year to everyone. Yes, I would agree with what you've said there, convener, that the capacity, like in all services, is stretched, and with the plethora of business support schemes that are out there, we're waiting for announcements on another 13 that the council's to administer. My team and Stuart Jimison's team are going to be responsible for administering them, and we don't have staff to do that other than taking people off their core job, benefit processing, council tax, accountancy support, etc. But my point I was going to make is, as well as welcome as the funding is that we're getting from the Scottish Government, quite often some of this funding isn't hypothecated, and we've got to make decisions at very short notice, and it doesn't lend itself to the committee timetable. And that's where something like the delegated powers would be very useful. But just before Christmas, you'll be aware, convener, so will Councillor Robertson, there were a couple of emergency powers report, one about making the £100 payment to qualifying children, and the other one was about what do we do when the schools were told they were going to be delayed going back till the 18th of January. We needed very quick approval for that. That required officers to write emergency powers reports and to put them through the system, which is a quick system, but it is a time-consuming system for the officers. We now know that the schools are not going to go back until at the very earliest, the beginning of February. So members will be asking, well, what's happening with the £25 a fortnight payment? We don't have authority as officers at this point in time to do that. So we'll need approval for that. And there's going to be a range of issues like that where as officers, we're going to have to stop, never mind our normal business, never mind the extra business of administering grants, but we're also going to have to write emergency powers reports to get approval for things which I'm sure that in the vast majority of cases members would agree with anyway, and it's just going through a bureaucratic process. So that's just a plea for me and a tangible example of where delegated powers for things like Scottish grants, which Gerard has included in the report, I think in paragraph 6.2 of his report, that would be extremely helpful to officers to allow us to get money out the door to the people who need it as quickly as possible. Thank you, convener.
Thanks, Alan. I'm going to bring Martin in to maybe respond to some of the points that Jana was raising as well. Martin?
So just a couple, through you, convener, just a couple of things. Firstly, obviously, I'm not going to go into sort of individual businesses because, albeit there may be nobody from the press here, we are in public session. However, we will be investigating fully anywhere where we think that there have been problems. What has happened with this particular increase, we've kind of seen across we are the worst, but there are a number of other authorities which have been relatively low, which have increased quite dramatically. So I'd probably give you Dumfries and Galloway as an example. The reasons possibly differ slightly, but I think all the authorities where we've seen big increases are authorities that were at lower levels, where there was more mixing of people, and they're the ones that the increases have been the greatest. So like Dumfries and Galloway, Scottish Borders, etc., have all increased substantially. And I think I heard mentioned that Highland and Argyll and Bute, although I haven't seen the figures to back this up, were mentioned this morning on Good Morning Scotland. So what that kind of says to me is that it's extremely unlikely that at the end of the month, given the transmissibility of this new virus, which is what's caused a lot of this really rapid increase, it's extremely unlikely that the First Minister or the government are going to say, go back to the tier system. I think we're kind of stuck with this where we are now to a degree until we're through to a certain point in the vaccination process. I think we need to be realistic about that, even though the First Minister may have said there's a review at the end of this month.
Okay, thanks, Martin. I'm going to bring in Robert now.
Hi, thanks, Convener. My thoughts on the matter is that I'm probably one of the older members of this council, and I fully understand the other members want to see the democratic process that we have this council carrying on, and I think that we all agree with that. But at the end of the day, we're living in unprecedented times. We're living in a global pandemic, something that I've never seen in my lifetime. I'm a bit older than most of you, and those who I hope I never see it again. In them circumstances, we have to think, sometimes we have to make some sort of small sacrifices for the greater good. You have a look at that, unless you live in a parallel universe, if you go out today, every day, you see the guys with the bin motor and the white van behind it with the guys who are the operators, because they're not allowed to get into the cabin with the driver. This is a big ask for that particular staff. It's very labour driven. The sustainability of this going forward can only be continued if our senior members of staff can concentrate on delivering the frontline services that we have to provide every single day of our life for the people out there. And in them circumstances, I think it's not much for us to ask to let the executive system come back in place until such times we get back to some sort of normality, and then we can get back to the full committee system. But at the moment, this makes a lot of sense, and more importantly, we're protecting the public and protecting the staff who work for us. And I think we should be going to this executive, PNR executive, until such time we're back to normal. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for that, Rob. I'm going to bring Chris Gurley back in again.
Thank you, Convener. I think there's maybe two things here. I think there's the use of executive powers by officers to get on and do the job, and I think most people are happy that is what is done. It's just the oversight and how we continue on with the committee structures. We certainly don't want to be getting in the way of timely decisions. So if a decision has to be made, it has to be made. Then we review it after it's made. I think I'm personally happy with that, and I have confidence in the officers to do that. I think it's just a case of we want to try and keep as much of normality as we possibly can. So for the existing, if we go back to what was done previously, how much of the day-to-day committee papers, etc., made its way into the executive subcommittee? How much of the percentage of the time used was actually discussing the day-to-day traffic orders, etc., and things like that? Probably not much. So it's just a case of just saying, well, we want to say is look back as we don't need to have copious amounts of reports at the standing committee meetings, but we certainly think we should continue them and have them a much more abridged version of these committee meetings, but keep them going so the necessary aspects of the day-to-day aspects of the council can keep on going, and then we can then have as required, we can have what they call another committee meeting to discuss and review any decisions made by officers. But I certainly think it's worthwhile trying to keep that sort of committee cycle going, just for the fact is that to separate out what would get officers to look at it. Say, well, we're not expecting to be doing everything. I think that the case has been made by Aubrey and other officers that there's going to be significant issues, possibly more with the backfill of operational staff and that going on, and people having to do different jobs. So if people are doing different jobs and they're not doing their thing job, we accept that. But let's look and see what needs to go, what would be best going through a 6-weekly cycle still, and what needs to be done in a 2-weekly cycle. And let's have the 2-weekly cycle for the stuff that needs emergency, and let's just keep the other things going for the 6-weekly cycle. I think that's where I'm at with it anyway.
Okay, thanks for that, Chris. I'm going to come specifically to the recommendations once we've heard from everybody and see where we can achieve consensus and where maybe we need to achieve potentially a bit of a compromise. So Next on my list is my good friend David Wilson, who had a specific question. David?
Yes, it's regarding quasi-judicial bodies. If we suspend them, how do we define what is an emergency and what really needs to be heard? And what would happen with the case of we went on a site visit in December? We're due to determine that at the February Planning Board. Does that now not happen until perhaps even May? There's been a lot of delay in the last year on planning applications, and I'm really, really worried that there's one in particular that is nearly a year old, and it could extend much further into this year. So what I'd like to know is what would define an emergency quasi-judicial body meeting?
Okay, Gerard's been quiet for a while, so I'm going to bring Gerard in on that one.
Convener, we have to address this because we have to look after not only the council's legal interests, but the legal interests of any applicant for a statutory consent or a licence. We have to do this. That's why I've put in the report in paragraph 7.1 the flexibility that officers would seek to employ. Now, Convener, there's a whole range of judicial business that this council undertakes. The widest range of issues, from child protection through to planning applications, the widest range. So in terms of paragraph 7.1, I'm fully accepting, and Councillor Wilson is wise to bring this matter to focus.
Gerard, hold on there. Come on, right. You're pushing it too far there.
Councillor Wilson is correct in bringing forward this question.
No, wise and profound.
Convener, I will return to the question and my answer, which is this: that, for example, the Human Resources Appeal Board, we won't be able to hold that unless we can have access for a whole range of people and the unions externally. But there might be a reason, a real urgent necessity to deal with that appeals board because of employment issues or employment rights. We're in public session. For the General Purposes Board, I'd be proposing that we don't have the General Purposes Board now, except for situations of urgency, and I would be liaising with the individual member for the council's interest and indeed for the applicant's interest. For the licensing board, the licensing board might require to actually meet. It might require to have a review meeting. If that's the case, the one constraint that I regrettably have to offer is that the Customer Service Room 4, which has been praised by external solicitors, would not be able to be used because of the nature of the emergency. It's forbidden. So there'd have to be external contact for that. For the planning board, for the local review body, for any statutory meeting that might require to be held, like predetermination hearings, I can give this guarantee. I would have to liaise with the chair of that board in order to determine the balance between the council's interest and the effective participation and conduct of such a matter. As one of those matters has revealed, we've got the capacity to deal with certain aspects of that now that we didn't have prior to December. It's a question of timescale and whether we have to do that in February or whether we'd be able to do that in more measured terms in March or April. But I give my guarantee to Councillor Wilson, we'd certainly be able to do it in March. I beg your pardon. We'd certainly be able to do it before May. If we have to, we'll do it before the end of February. And that's a guarantee. We will do that. But that's only if the situation merits it. And in those specifics, I would be liaising with each and every individual chair of the quasi-judicial business from the HR Appeals Board all the way through to the LRB. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you, Gerard. I'll take that as a yes.
You're very wise to do so, David, yeah. Okay, Tommy, you want to come in?
Yeah, thanks, Convener. Councillor Clougherty made a very valid point earlier on about members being disenfranchised. And I think it's a fair point. And my big question to Gerard is, if we have to revert and cancel committees, can we revert to the P&R subcommittee as a whole? Because it will involve more members scrutinising decisions and give them an opportunity to have their views. I think it's something we can maybe consider. I would just like Gerard's viewpoint on that, please.
Gerard?
Convener, the Chief Executive's given that confirmation already, and I'll add that assurance. P&R Executive Subcommittee As you know, I already circulate every week the operational log to all members of the council, bringing to their attention the fact that that will be considered at the specific following PR Executive Subcommittee. Chief Executives confirmed about enhanced communications to be designed and subject to actually discussions with members. And obviously there can be observers as well at the PR Exec Sub. And as you, I think it was yourself, Convener, has said, that's subject to the Chair's, the Convener's opportunity and discretion to bring any individual member on in relation to a specific matter or a specific ward-based matter. So there are many opportunities to assure Councillor McVeigh of that.
Thanks, Gerard, but that's not my point. My point being that, and I'm just trying to find it here.
Yeah, Tommy, you're saying instead of the committees being delegated to the PNR Executive Subcommittee, it could be delegated to the PNR Committee, which has 11 members, and
Yes.
the exec has 6 members.
Yes.
Okay, right. Ronnie, you want to come in?
Yeah, thanks, Stephen. I think you just answered my question, actually, because it was a question. I think most of us would never underestimate the kind of outstanding work that the officers are doing and have been doing. And Jim did talk earlier about disenfranchising. So what would it be possible, and I think you've just touched on it, to suspend the regular cycle of committee meetings? Basically, we understand the concerns, but why can't the PNR Committee themselves be the authoritative body? Basically just one committee to operate maybe every 2 weeks. So the concerns are addressed, but not by a subgroup. And basically we would still have immediacy and we would still be able to have quick decisions. So I think that would be where I would conclude on based what I've heard this afternoon. Thanks, Stephen.
Okay, thanks, Ronnie. I mean, that is an option, Ronnie, which essentially means that you move from a subcommittee, which Gerard will keep me right, has 6 members, to a committee which has 11 members, but they meet on exactly the same basis. So absolutely, that is an option. It's clearly no other position articulated by the SNP group, who's got a preference for continuing on with the cycle. Now, what I want to do is I want to set aside, to some extent, a moment, the consideration of the committee process to the other recommendations in the report. So there are 4 recommendations in the report, 3.1, 3.2, 3.3 and 3.4. So I'm picking up that members seem to be comfortable with 3.3 and 3.4. There is that understanding that officers will have to take emergency decisions, effectively delegated decisions, and it's clearly important they're recorded and reported. So am I picking that up right, that people are comfortable with 3.3 and 3.4? Yeah. Okay, yeah, that seems to be the case, so we can agree those. We're then into the situation with the committee. And I think, to me, there seems to be essentially 3 options potentially. One is the recommendations as in the report, which on balance my group would be comfortable with. That's not to say that we didn't have a fairly lengthy debate last night at our meeting around it, but we'd be fairly comfortable on that. There is the proposition advanced by Tommy and Ronnie that rather than things being delegated to PNR Exec Sub, we delegate it to the PNR Committee. And then I think the other proposition potentially is that obviously a number of committees are going to take place in this cycle, and we're going to end the cycle with the full council on the 19th of February.
19th February.
So those committees that, on the basis of the recommendations, that wouldn't take place in this cycle would be, and Gerard again will keep me correct on this, education and communities, general purposes, and policy and resources. Yeah.
Yes, give you
What's
that.
been suggested is potentially we could have truncated versions of those committees, and they only consider business that's absolutely urgent. And if, for example, in the case, I suppose, maybe the the general purposes, there isn't business that's absolutely, as we've seen before, both the general purposes and planning, there's no business they don't meet, etc. So that would keep the time commitment to an absolute minimum in terms of the committees. And then the position could be reviewed again. That's Brian just delivering something to me. And then the position could be reviewed again at the full council on the 18th or 19th of February.
18th of February, convener.
18th,
I should have mentioned the Police and Fire Scrutiny Committee on 4th February as well. My apologies.
Right. So, but again, I mean, I suppose in terms of that, it's a bit urgent business in a way it may not be sufficiently urgent business, because I think the police themselves will be focused in a lot of urgent operational matters as well. So essentially they are, to me, the sort of the three options. My group's prepared to compromise and agree with either of the alternative options. So I'm going to turn to Elizabeth and see what her thoughts are and what position her group would favour, and then I'll maybe come to Ronnie.
Thanks, convener, for navigating actually through those three options. I think they are quite a clear summary of all the discussion that we've had. So thank you for getting us to that point. I think our group's position would be following on the third option that you suggested there, that we have the delegated powers and everything that's all dealt with. We've sorted all that, but that we would continue with the full cycle, reviewing it at the end of the cycle, but only have the meetings being absolute core business. Nothing that was extraneous would come anywhere near those committees.
Okay, Ronnie?
Yeah, I'm okay with that.
Okay, David?
I'm okay with what Elizabeth has proposed.
Okay, Chana?
I'm quite happy with that.
Okay, Chief Exec?
Well, it's good to get consensus, convener, for a starter, and we are grateful for the, I suppose, approval of the delegate authority to get on with things. What I would say is, if we are going to have committees in a shortened format, I would be looking for officers to bring maybe a single report, convener, dealing with the individual items on that report, and allow members then to have discussion on that. And I'm working on the basis that a P&R exec sub would not be called, and that any urgent matters would be dealt with through the delegate authority, and that the appropriate log would go to the relevant committee.
Yeah, I see nodding heads around that. I mean, I think the view of the committee is that you keep the business of a committee to only the absolutely urgent business. So I think we have to have confidence in yourselves as officers to reflect that decision of the committee. So it should be fairly short and sharp, focused meetings that are focused on urgent decisions.
And just to clarify, in terms of any decisions that we take between committees relevant to that committee, we would just include in the log, make sure that's circulated, and that would be then scrutinised at that committee.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, I do think that there may COVID brings matters that don't neatly fall into individual committees. So there may well be a requirement, as has been the case in the past, to call in our executive subcommittees. There may well be, but I suppose that will be if required. And obviously we do have the emergency powers process as well.
Okay.
Right, Gerard, you're just going to make sense of that for us before we finalise.
I will. Thank you for that, convener. For paragraph 3.3, I will amend those last few words so it's for scrutiny by the relevant service committee. And Otherwise, I will adjust the terms of 3.1 and 3.2 to reflect the unanimous decision of the committee to continue with the full cycle for this cycle under expedited business and format of reports to reflect that, with the review to be undertaken on the 18th of February's full council meeting. Would that be adequate, Convener?
I believe so, Gerard.
Thank you.
I'm looking for nodding heads again. Okay.
Thank you.
I think that's us. So,
Convener, this could come in just for members to be aware that we meet, the committees meet every 6 weeks, so the logs will be going up to some of them will be a bit dated, but they'll go up to the next relevant committee date.
Unless we change our mind on the 18th of February, Aubrey, so we'll see how it goes. That's one crisis averted. Okay, so thanks everybody for your attendance and your participation. I know it took a wee bit of a while. Some of us now have 19 minutes before the Health and Social Care Committee to get a cup of tea. So thank you very much and take care, everybody.
Thank you, Convener.
Thank you.